The morning sun cast long shadows across the military academy grounds as Samuel Martinez pushed his cleaning cart down the polished hallway. At 55 years old, he had been working as a janitor at the prestigious West Point Military Academy for 12 years. His weathered hands gripped the mop handle with the same dedication he once used to hold a rifle during his own military service 25 years ago. Samuel was not just any janitor. He was a Vietnam War veteran who had served 3 tours of duty before an injury forced him into early retirement. The Academy cadets knew him as the quiet man who cleaned their dormitories and classrooms, always offering a warm smile and encouraging words. What they didn't know was that Samuel had received 2 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star for his bravery in combat. Every morning, Samuel arrived at 5 a.m., an hour before his shift officially began. He would walk through the empty corridors checking on things, making sure everything was perfect for the young men and women who would soon fill these halls. The cadets were like his own children to him, and he took pride in maintaining their environment. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the academy was buzzing with excitement. The annual 5-mile endurance test was scheduled for later that day. All 500 cadets would participate in this grueling challenge that tested their physical and mental limits. Samuel had watched this tradition for years, always feeling a sense of pride as he observed these future military leaders push themselves to excellence. As Samuel cleaned the main assembly hall, he could hear the cadets discussing their strategies for the test. Some boasted about their training routines, while others nervously adjusted their gear. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and friendly competition. Samuel paused in his work, remembering his own days of military training, when every test felt like a matter of life and death. Sergeant Williams, a tough 250-pound drill instructor known for his intimidating presence and booming voice, walked past Samuel with his usual stern expression. The sergeant had a reputation for being the hardest trainer at the academy, pushing cadets beyond their comfort zones. Despite his harsh exterior, Samuel had observed moments of genuine care in the sergeant's interactions with struggling cadets. The janitor continued his work methodically, cleaning windows until they sparkled and ensuring every surface was spotless. He took special care with the trophy cases that displayed the academy's proud history. Each medal and photograph represented sacrifice and dedication, values that Samuel understood deeply from his own military experience. As the day progressed, Samuel could feel the building energy throughout the academy. Instructors were making final preparations, medical personnel were setting up aid stations along the route, and cadets were going through their pre-test rituals. The 5-mile course wound through challenging terrain, including hills, rocky paths, and dense forest areas that would test every aspect of the participants' endurance. Samuel had seen many of these tests over the years, and he knew that today would be different somehow. He couldn't explain the feeling, but something in the air suggested that this particular endurance test would become a day that nobody at the academy would ever forget. As he finished his morning duties, Samuel prepared to watch another group of young people prove their worth and dedication to serving their country. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as 500 cadets assembled at the starting line. Their faces showed a mixture of determination, nervousness, and excitement. Samuel watched from his usual spot near the equipment shed, where he had positioned himself to see the beginning of the race. He always enjoyed witnessing these moments when young people pushed themselves beyond their perceived limitations. Sergeant Williams stood at the front of the group, his massive frame commanding immediate attention from every cadet present. His voice thundered across the assembly area as he delivered the final instructions. The sergeant's reputation preceded him. He was known for completing the same 5-mile course in record time despite his substantial weight, proving that determination mattered more than appearance. The course ahead was notorious for its difficulty. It began with a steep uphill climb through rocky terrain, continued through dense forest where roots and fallen branches created obstacles, then wound around a lake before finishing with another challenging hill back to the academy grounds. Many cadets had trained for months specifically for this test, knowing it would become part of their permanent record. As the starting signal echoed across the grounds, 500 pairs of boots began moving in unison. The initial pace was swift, with eager cadets pushing toward the front of the pack. Samuel smiled as he watched their enthusiasm, remembering his own youth when every challenge seemed conquerable with enough effort and determination. Sergeant Williams ran alongside the cadets, his heavy breathing audible even from Samuel's distance. Despite his intimidating classroom presence, the sergeant always participated in physical challenges alongside his students. This gesture earned him respect from cadets who initially feared his harsh training methods but came to understand his commitment to their development. The first mile passed without incident as the group spread out according to individual fitness levels and running strategies. Samuel could see cadets encouraging each other, sharing water and maintaining the camaraderie that made military service special. The strongest runners had pulled ahead, but the majority stayed together in a supportive cluster. Samuel decided to follow the group's progress by walking along the maintenance road that paralleled parts of the course. His janitor duties were flexible, and he often used break time to watch academy events. Other staff members had gathered at various points along the route, creating an informal cheering section for the cadets. As the group entered the forest section, Samuel noticed Sergeant Williams maintaining his position near the middle of the pack. The sergeant's face showed the strain of keeping pace with much younger and lighter participants, but his determination never wavered. Several cadets ran near him, clearly drawing inspiration from his example of perseverance. The challenging terrain began taking its toll as cadets navigated roots, rocks, and steep inclines. Samuel heard occasional shouts of encouragement and saw cadets helping each other over difficult obstacles. This spirit of cooperation reminded him why he loved working at the academy. These young people embodied the best values of military service. By the 3rd mile marker, the group had spread out considerably. The fastest runners were well ahead, while others struggled with the demanding pace and difficult terrain. Samuel positioned himself at a clearing, where he could see a long stretch of the course, wanting to witness as many cadets as possible pass through this challenging section. From his vantage point, Samuel could see Sergeant Williams still running steadily, though his pace had clearly slowed. The sergeant's commitment to completing the course alongside his cadets was admirable, especially considering the physical demands on someone of his size and age. Samuel felt a kinship with the sergeant, understanding the pride that came from refusing to quit despite obvious difficulties. The 4th mile proved to be the breaking point. Samuel was walking along the maintenance road when he heard urgent shouts coming from the forest trail. His military instincts immediately kicked in, and he quickened his pace toward the commotion. Through the trees, he could see a cluster of cadets gathered around something on the ground. As Samuel reached the scene, his heart sank. Sergeant Williams lay unconscious on the trail, his massive body sprawled across the narrow path. His face was pale and covered in sweat, and his breathing was labored and irregular. The cadets surrounding him looked panicked and uncertain about what to do next. "Someone needs to get help," shouted Cadet Johnson, a 20-year-old from Texas who had been running near the sergeant when he collapsed. He just stopped talking mid-sentence and fell forward. "I think he hit his head on that rock." Samuel immediately took charge of the situation, his combat medic training from Vietnam flooding back to him. He knelt beside the sergeant and quickly checked his vital signs. The man's pulse was weak but steady, and he appeared to be suffering from severe heat exhaustion, combined with a possible head injury from his fall. "Listen to me carefully," Samuel said to the gathered cadets with calm authority. "Two of you need to run ahead and alert the medical station at mile marker 5. Tell them we need immediate medical attention and a stretcher team. The rest of you continue with your test. Standing here won't help the sergeant." Most of the cadets reluctantly continued their run after designating 2 of their fastest members to seek help. Samuel remained with the unconscious sergeant, using his shirt to create shade and checking repeatedly for signs of improvement. Minutes felt like hours as he waited for medical assistance to arrive. The problem became clear when the 2 cadets returned with disturbing news. The medical team was dealing with multiple heat-related emergencies at different points along the course. The ambulance was already transporting another cadet to the hospital, and the backup medical personnel were spread thin across the 5-mile route. "They said it could be 30 minutes before they can get a stretcher team here," reported Cadet Martinez breathlessly. "The terrain is too rough for vehicles, and they're short-staffed because of the other emergencies." Samuel looked down at Sergeant Williams, whose condition seemed to be deteriorating. The man needed immediate medical attention, and 30 minutes might be too long. The nearest medical station was still over a mile away through difficult forest terrain that would challenge even the strongest cadets. Without hesitation, Samuel made a decision that would change everything. He had carried wounded soldiers through much worse terrain during wartime, and he wasn't about to let this good man suffer because help was delayed. The sergeant might be tough on cadets, but Samuel had observed his genuine care for their development and well-being. "Help me get him positioned," Samuel told the remaining cadets. Despite being 55 years old and significantly smaller than the 250-pound sergeant, Samuel's military training had taught him proper lifting techniques for carrying wounded personnel. He had done this before under combat conditions, and he would do it again. The cadets looked at him with disbelief. "Sir, you can't carry him that far," Cadet Martinez protested. "He weighs at least 250 pounds, and it's over a mile through rough terrain. We should wait for the medical team." Samuel was already positioning himself to lift the sergeant. His weathered hands gripped the unconscious man's uniform as he prepared for the most challenging carry of his life. The distance ahead would test every muscle in his aging body, but failure wasn't an option when someone's life hung in the balance. "Sometimes waiting isn't an option," Samuel replied grimly. "I've carried heavier men through worse places than this. You cadets go finish your test. This is something I need to do." Samuel hoisted Sergeant Williams onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry, the same technique he had learned decades ago in military training. The sergeant's 250-pound frame immediately tested every muscle in Samuel's aging body, but he steadied himself and began walking. The cadets watched in amazement as this quiet janitor, they barely knew, transformed into a determined soldier before their eyes. First 100 yards were manageable, as Samuel found his rhythm and adjusted to the weight distribution. His legs, strengthened by years of walking academy grounds and decades of military conditioning, carried him steadily forward. The unconscious sergeant's breathing remained labored, reminding Samuel that time was critical. As the terrain became more challenging, Samuel's pace slowed but never stopped. Tree roots threatened to trip him with every step, while low-hanging branches forced him to duck and weave carefully to protect his unconscious burden. Sweat poured down his face, but his determination never wavered. Word of Samuel's incredible feat began spreading among the cadets still running the course. Those who passed him on the trail couldn't believe what they were seeing. A 55-year-old janitor carrying their intimidating drill sergeant through terrain that challenged even the fittest young cadets. Some offered to help, but Samuel politely declined, knowing that transferring the weight would waste precious time. By the half-mile mark, Samuel's breathing had become labored and his legs were trembling from the strain. The sergeant's dead weight made every step exponentially more difficult than normal walking. Samuel's back screamed in protest and his knees threatened to buckle. But he pressed forward with the same determination that had earned him military decorations years earlier. The trail curved around several large boulders, forcing Samuel to navigate carefully while maintaining his balance. One wrong step could send both men tumbling into the rocky ravine below. The unconscious sergeant groaned occasionally, giving Samuel hope that he was still fighting to recover consciousness. Samuel began talking to the unconscious man as he walked, partly to keep himself focused and partly hoping his voice might help guide the sergeant back to awareness. "Come on, Sergeant," he whispered between labored breaths. "These cadets need you back on your feet. You've got too much left to teach them." The 3/4-mile mark brought Samuel to the steepest part of the remaining journey. The trail climbed sharply upward through loose rocks and exposed roots that made every step treacherous. Other cadets continued passing them, many stopping briefly to offer assistance or words of encouragement before continuing their own test. Samuel's military training had taught him to break overwhelming tasks into smaller, manageable goals. Instead of thinking about the remaining distance, he focused on reaching the next tree, then the next rock formation, then the next turn in the trail. This mental technique helped him push through the growing pain in his joints and muscles. As news of the janitor's heroic effort spread along the course, something remarkable began happening. Cadets who had already finished their test started running back along the trail to witness Samuel's incredible journey. Word reached the academy grounds and staff members began gathering at the medical station to wait for his arrival. The final 1/4 mile stretched before Samuel like an impossible mountain. His vision blurred from exhaustion and dehydration, but he could see the medical station in the distance. The sergeant's weight felt like it had doubled, and Samuel's legs moved more from willpower than physical strength. Every step required conscious effort to prevent collapse. Samuel's breathing became increasingly ragged as he approached the medical station. His entire body shook from the monumental effort, but Sergeant Williams remained securely positioned on his shoulders. The impossible journey was nearly complete, accomplished through sheer determination and the unwavering spirit of a man who refused to abandon a fellow soldier in need. As Samuel staggered into the medical station clearing with Sergeant Williams still on his shoulders, a profound silence fell over everyone present. Medical personnel immediately rushed to help transfer the unconscious sergeant to a waiting stretcher, while Samuel collapsed to his knees. Gasping for air and shaking from complete physical exhaustion, the medical team worked quickly to stabilize Sergeant Williams, checking his vital signs and preparing him for transport to the base hospital. Samuel watched anxiously from where he sat on the ground, still catching his breath but refusing medical attention until he knew the sergeant would be okay. His hands trembled from the enormous physical effort he had just completed. Dr. Sarah Chen, the Academy's chief medical officer, approached Samuel with concern written across her face. "Samuel, that was an incredible thing you just did, but I need to check you for injuries. Carrying that much weight for over a mile could have seriously damaged your back or joints." Samuel waved off her concerns, his eyes never leaving the medical team working on Sergeant Williams. "I'm fine, Doc. Just tell me he's going to be okay. That's all that matters right now." His voice was hoarse from exertion, but his resolve remained unshakable. Within minutes, word of Samuel's heroic carry had spread throughout the academy like wildfire. Cadets who had completed their test began gathering around the medical station, creating an impromptu assembly of witnesses to something extraordinary. Those still on the course heard the news and quickened their pace to reach the finish line. Academy Commandant Colonel Rebecca Torres arrived at the scene after receiving reports about the situation. She found Samuel sitting quietly while medical personnel confirmed that Sergeant Williams was stable and responding to treatment. The colonel had heard many stories during her military career, but nothing quite like what had just occurred on her academy grounds. "Samuel," Colonel Torres said, approaching the exhausted janitor with deep respect in her voice, "what you just did goes beyond the call of duty. You saved that man's life through sheer determination and courage." Samuel looked up at the colonel with tired but clear eyes. "Ma'am, I just did what anyone would do. Sergeant Williams needed help and I was in a position to provide it. That's what we do for each other in the military, even if some of us are just janitors now." As more cadets finished their test and gathered around the medical station, an unprecedented scene began to unfold. 500 young men and women, still breathing heavily from their own grueling 5-mile challenge, stood in complete silence as they absorbed what they had witnessed. Many had seen Samuel carrying the sergeant, but now they understood the full magnitude of his accomplishment. The silence was not empty or uncomfortable. It was filled with profound respect and awe. These cadets, who were training to become military officers, recognized true leadership and sacrifice when they saw it. Samuel had demonstrated values that couldn't be taught in classrooms or learned from textbooks. Cadet Johnson, who had been present when Sergeant Williams collapsed, stepped forward from the crowd. His voice carried clearly in the still air as he addressed Samuel. "Sir, what you did today showed us what real courage looks like. You didn't hesitate, you didn't calculate odds, you just acted to save someone who needed help." Other cadets began nodding in agreement, but the respectful silence continued. They instinctively understood that this moment required reverence rather than celebration. Samuel had shown them something more valuable than any lesson they could learn in their military courses. He had demonstrated the true meaning of service and sacrifice. Samuel slowly stood up, his body still aching from the incredible physical effort. He looked around at the hundreds of young faces watching him with newfound respect and admiration. These were the future leaders of the military, and somehow his simple act of carrying a fellow soldier had become a lesson they would never forget. The medical team finished preparing Sergeant Williams for transport, and as they loaded him into the ambulance, the sergeant briefly regained consciousness. His eyes found Samuel in the crowd, and though he was too weak to speak, his expression conveyed gratitude that needed no words to be understood. 3 days after the incident, Samuel returned to work as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He arrived at his usual 5 a.m. start time, pushed his cleaning cart down the familiar hallways and began his daily routine of maintaining the academy grounds. However, everything had changed in ways he didn't yet fully understand. As Samuel cleaned the main corridor, cadets began approaching him throughout the morning. Instead of the polite nods and brief greetings he usually received, they stopped to shake his hand and express their gratitude. Many shared how his actions had inspired them to reconsider their own definitions of courage and service. "Mr. Martinez," said Cadet Williams, a young woman from California, "what you did changed how I think about leadership. You showed us that real heroes don't wear uniforms or carry titles. They just do what needs to be done when it matters most." Samuel felt uncomfortable with the attention and praise. In his mind, he had simply done what any decent person would do in the same situation. The idea that his actions were somehow extraordinary puzzled him, though he appreciated the cadet's kind words and obvious sincerity. Colonel Torres found Samuel cleaning windows in the administration building and asked him to step into her office. Samuel worried he might be in trouble for leaving his duties during work hours, but the colonel's expression suggested something entirely different was happening. "Samuel, I've been in the military for 25 years, and I've never seen anything quite like what you did," Colonel Torres began. "Your actions have inspired every person at this academy, and they deserve recognition beyond simple thanks." The colonel explained that she had contacted Samuel's former commanding officers and discovered his distinguished military record. His 2 Purple Hearts and Bronze Star had somehow never made it into his academy personnel file, leaving his heroic past unknown to most people who worked with him daily. "I want to recommend you for the Army Civilian Service Achievement Award," Colonel Torres continued. "Your actions went far beyond the call of duty and demonstrated the highest values of military service. You saved a man's life through personal sacrifice and incredible physical courage." Samuel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but I don't need any awards. Knowing that Sergeant Williams is recovering is reward enough for me. I just hope the cadets learned something useful from what happened." The colonel smiled at his humility, recognizing a characteristic common among true heroes. They rarely see their own actions as extraordinary. "Samuel, this isn't just about you. Those cadets witnessed something that will influence their entire military careers. They need to see that heroism is recognized and valued." Later that afternoon, Samuel received a phone call from the base hospital. Sergeant Williams was recovering well and asking to speak with him. Samuel agreed to visit after his shift ended, curious about what the sergeant might want to discuss. At the hospital, Samuel found Sergeant Williams sitting up in bed, looking much better than when he had last seen him unconscious on the forest trail. The big man's eyes filled with emotion when Samuel entered the room. "Samuel, I owe you my life," Sergeant Williams said, his usually commanding voice soft with gratitude. "The doctors told me what you did. Carrying me over a mile through that terrain probably saved me from permanent brain damage or worse." Samuel pulled up a chair beside the bed. "You would have done the same thing for me, Sergeant. That's what soldiers do for each other, whether we're active duty or just pushing mop buckets around." Sergeant Williams shook his head in amazement. "Those cadets keep talking about what they learned from watching you. They said seeing a janitor refuse to give up on a fallen soldier taught them more about military values than any textbook or lecture ever could." The 2 men talked for over an hour, sharing stories from their military service and discussing the cadets they both cared about. Samuel learned that Sergeant Williams had grown up in poverty and joined the military to create a better life for himself, while the sergeant discovered Samuel's distinguished combat record and understanding of why he preferred quiet service to recognition. As Samuel prepared to leave, Sergeant Williams made a request that surprised him. "Samuel, when I return to duty, I want you to speak to my leadership classes. Those cadets need to hear from someone who truly understands what service means. Will you consider it?" Samuel promised to think about the request, though public speaking had never been comfortable for him. As he drove back to his small apartment, Samuel reflected on how dramatically his quiet life had changed in just a few days, all because he had refused to abandon a fellow soldier in need. 6 months later, Samuel stood before 200 cadets in the Academy's main auditorium, something he never could have imagined before that October day. Sergeant Williams, fully recovered and back to his intimidating classroom presence, had introduced him as a guest speaker for the Leadership Seminar series. Samuel's first speech had been awkward and nervous, but his authentic stories from Vietnam and his simple philosophy about service had resonated powerfully with the cadets. Word spread and requests for him to speak to other groups began arriving regularly. He discovered that his quiet wisdom and genuine humility made him an unexpectedly effective teacher. Leadership isn't about rank or titles, Samuel told the assembled cadets. It's about doing the right thing when nobody is watching, and helping others when they need it most. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones nobody sees or remembers. The story of Samuel's heroic carry had become academy legend, told and retold by cadets who wanted to share the lesson they had learned that day. New cadets arriving at the academy heard the story during orientation, and it became part of the institution's culture and values. Samuel still worked as a janitor, insisting that his custodial duties remained important and fulfilling work. However, his role had expanded to include mentoring struggling cadets and sharing his experiences with leadership classes. The academy had created an informal program allowing him to spend time counseling cadets who needed guidance or encouragement. Cadet Martinez, who had been present during the original incident, sought out Samuel regularly for advice about military career decisions. "Mr. Martinez," she said after one of their conversations, "you helped me understand that service isn't about personal glory, it's about being willing to sacrifice for something bigger than yourself." The annual 5-mile endurance test had become known as the Samuel Martinez Challenge, though Samuel protested the name change. The academy had installed a memorial plaque at the spot where Sergeant Williams had collapsed, commemorating the values of courage, sacrifice, and service that Samuel had demonstrated. Samuel's story had spread beyond the academy walls through graduates who carried the lesson to their military assignments around the world. Letters arrived regularly from former cadets sharing how his example had influenced their leadership decisions in challenging situations. On the first anniversary of the incident, the academy held a special ceremony recognizing Samuel's contribution to military education and values. 500 cadets stood in perfect silence as Colonel Torres presented him with the Army Civilian Service Achievement Award he had initially tried to decline. "Samuel Martinez represents the best of military service," Colonel Torres announced to the assembly. "He proved that heroism isn't limited by age, rank, or job title. His actions reminded us all that the values we teach here are meant to be lived, not just studied." Samuel accepted the award with characteristic humility, using his brief speech to thank the cadets for teaching him as much as he had taught them. He emphasized that every person present had the potential to make similar choices when faced with opportunities to serve others. After the ceremony, Samuel returned to his janitor duties, pushing his cleaning cart down the familiar hallways he had walked for 13 years. The difference was that now every cadet, instructor, and staff member who passed him understood that they were in the presence of someone truly special. Sergeant Williams, watching from his classroom window as Samuel worked below, smiled with deep respect for the man who had saved his life. The incident had changed both men, creating a bond forged through sacrifice and mutual understanding of what service really meant. As Samuel cleaned the trophy cases displaying the academy's proud history, he paused to look at his own award now displayed among the honors. The simple plaque read, "For extraordinary courage in service to others." He smiled quietly, knowing that the real reward wasn't the recognition, but the knowledge that his actions had inspired hundreds of future military leaders to understand the true meaning of heroism. The legacy of that October day would continue through generations of cadets who learned that the greatest acts of courage often come from the most unexpected sources, and that true leadership means never abandoning those who need help, regardless of the personal cost.